Welcome to Upstream. I'm Shane Morris. It's the scenario that no business owner expects when he or she opens the doors. What could be less controversial than flowers and cake? But my guest today learned the hard way years ago that just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics will not take an interest in you. Jack Phillips, owner of Colorado's Masterpiece Cake Shop, and Barronelle Stutzman, longtime owner of Arlene's Flowers in Washington State, didn't set out to become cultural lightning rods when they went into business making people's special occasions more beautiful. But that's exactly what happened to them. Why? Because not long ago, state legislatures and courts and even sometimes voters in this country decided to do something that no one had tried in all of human history, to redefine marriage to include members of the same sex. And as if on cue, those who supported this new definition began to pick fights with those who believed in the age-old definition. They tried to shut down these people's businesses, to force them to celebrate what they believed to be wrong, and to compel speech and creative expression, to make artists use their talents in ways their consciences just would not allow. Well, in short, the ability to enter gay marriages was not enough. For some, it was also necessary to destroy those who wouldn't join the celebration. Well, today I'm speaking in person with Jack and Barronelle at the 2022 Wilberforce Weekend in Orlando, Florida, where in a few hours we'll be recognizing these two individuals jointly with the William Wilberforce Award. These are, frankly, two of the least combative people you will ever meet. They don't look or sound like cultural lightning rods. They don't have their own shows. They don't have their own podcasts. They don't go on talk shows to gin up political controversy. Yet after a decade plus of legal battles represented by the able folks at Alliance Defending Freedom, here they are to tell their story and to help us understand how to live redemptive lives in a cultural moment that demands compromise of us. For the first segment, I want to talk with Jack, who's joined by Matt Sharp, Senior Counsel at Alliance Defending Freedom. We'll be bringing up Barronelle in just a few minutes. For now, Jack, Matt, welcome to Upstream. Tell me about your work and why you love it, Jack.
I opened Masterpiece Cake Shop back in 1993, but prior to that, 1974, when I graduated high school, I needed a job. And I had no college, no plans, but a man across the street from me owned a large wholesale bakery, and he was gracious enough to hire me. And after I got used to working for a living, work 10 minutes, 2 hours here, take 10 minutes break, be right back here and do this for 2 more hours and all that stuff, I found that I really enjoyed the baking industry, all the things about it, the people, the pace, the product. And I knew someday that I would open my own bakery. And a couple of years down the road, he bought out another bakery that had cake decorators, cake designers come in. And when I saw that, I thought, that's for me, because I had a background in art. I love to draw and paint and do all those things. And now I see these people doing this with cake as their canvas. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open a bakery, but it's going to be a cake shop. So I started putting money away and planning. I even knew the name right away. It was going to be Masterpiece Cake Shop, because Masterpiece says art, Cake Shop says cake. You're not going to come in looking for a loaf of bread. Hopefully you're going to come in looking for an artistic cake that you can use to celebrate. So eventually I got it opened in 1993.
You said you were an artist. You did drawing, painting. What was it?
I love doing all of that. I have a photograph of my first drawing table, and I'm looking all proud, and I spent just a lot of time doing that. If I had nothing to do, I had a pencil in my hand. So,
were you better rounded than I was? Because all I did was draw dinosaurs for like the first 5 years.
Looking back, no, I wasn't that good at it, but I enjoyed it, and God used it to give me this career.
So here you are, you're designing these cakes. You've got a customer base that loves what you do. What happened to catapult you into the national spotlight, and were you expecting anything like this to occur?
No, we weren't expecting anything like this. Back in 1993, when we opened, we had already sat down, my wife and I, and decided, different things that we would do with our cake shop, cakes that we could create, cakes that we could not create, occasions that we would celebrate and not celebrate. For instance, we decided we wouldn't create cakes that celebrated Halloween, or cakes that would, have profanity on them, or pornography, or anything. And you'd think, pornography on a cake, but yeah. We had talked about a lot of those things, including cakes for same-sex weddings, and we knew that's not on anybody's radar, but we talked about it. So there were guidelines that we already had that we knew we couldn't create, but it was because of the message that the cake would express.
Did you have any thought leading up to the actual, incident that led to this court case that it would happen? Were you kind of anticipating something like this, bracing for it, or even rehearsing what you'd do, or was it like completely out of the blue?
It was kind of a surprise, but it was also something that we had rehearsed, not this particular cake in this celebration, but I mentioned that we don't do cakes for Halloween. We opened in September of 1993, and October is right behind that, and that's one of the biggest holidays in the cake business. So right from the start, we had to practice telling people, I'm sorry, that's a cake that we can't create, or other cakes that would come in. So we had plenty of opportunities to say, we'll serve you in any other way, we'll sell you anything in our shop, you can do whatever you like with it, but we can't create this cake. So when this one, the same-sex wedding cake, came up in 2012, we were already practiced at saying, I'm sorry. And so when these two gentlemen came in and said, one of them said, we're here to look at wedding cakes, and the other one said, it's for our wedding, I knew what my answer was going to be. I just had to figure out how to phrase it politely and let them know that it was the cake that I couldn't create. But you're welcome in my store. So I told them, I'll make you birthday cakes, shower cakes, sell you cookies, brownies, but I just can't create a cake for a same-sex wedding.
So they walked out of there, and did you think something was coming at that point?
I was surprised because they didn't just walk out. They walked out yelling, flipping me off. It was an abrupt and wild exit. And I thought, what in the world just happened with that? So I wasn't expecting that.
Had you ever expected your convictions on this particular issue to be tested? I mean, you mentioned Halloween and stuff, but this one is just like the cultural flashpoint that was evolving at that point.
It had happened. We had a couple other couples come in before that we had told them, and they said, oh, okay, they understood, and they left. But these two young men immediately went to social media. 20 minutes after they left, I started getting phone calls, hateful, vulgar phone calls. And the day they came in, I sat down to talk with them, but that wasn't necessarily my job. It would have been one of my employees. But they were busy at the time, so I went over and sat with them. It wasn't my job to answer the phone. When it rang, wasn't expecting what I got, and then I had death threats and, hundreds and thousands of emails. Wasn't expecting any of that.
And this was based just on the social media post before any sort of legal proceedings had occurred?
Right. I'm not sure what the date was that they filed a complaint with the state, but this was a Thursday afternoon, July 19, 2012, about 4:30 in the afternoon. The phone started ringing 20 minutes after that and continued all night Thursday till I closed up shop, all day Friday, all day Saturday, and just continued. And I was connected with ADF by Tuesday afternoons.
So obviously a few of those phone calls and emails were not very articulate, but the ones that were, what were they saying about you?
That I don't deserve to live, that I'm a bigot, that, I hope you out of business, I hope they bring the Lions back and the Coliseums for people like you.
These cases, yours and Barronelle's, were billed from the very beginning by the media as, the guy who wouldn't sell a gay couple a cake, the woman who wouldn't arrange flowers for a gay couple. What's the problem with that framing? Why is that inaccurate?
It's completely inaccurate because I wouldn't create that cake for anybody. It wasn't because they were a gay couple. It's because it celebrated a view of marriage that disagreed with my Christian biblical view that God created marriage for a man and a woman as a gift. This was celebrating something else. They could go somewhere else and get it. In fact, I think there were 87 bakeries in Denver that would welcome them. There was only one that had a problem, and it wasn't welcoming them. It was that cake, because I can't celebrate a marriage that I don't believe in.
Yeah, so it's a message that you're discriminating against, not a person.
If you were walking down this hall in this hotel, and you're looking for a conference room, and you walk in, you see chairs like this, okay, it's a conference room. You walk into another one, you see rows of chairs and whatever, and a podium on a stage. You wouldn't think anything about it, but if you walked in and you saw a cake in the corner, you would know without anybody telling you, there's a marriage, it's a wedding celebration. The wedding cake itself is a message. It says there's a marriage.
Jack, I've talked with so many people about this sort of scenario, and in many ways, your scenario was one that many commentators on the conservative end of the spectrum, Christians, sort of imagined as taking place beforehand. And then, lo and behold, there it is, the very events that they expected sort of unfolding. And when I've talked to people about this, especially more liberal-minded folks in my generation, the sentiment has just been, why couldn't Jack just bake a cake? Why is it so hard to just bake a cake? What's the big deal? You don't have to endorse same-sex marriage. You can just do that. But your conscience wouldn't let you do that. And you described a cake as a message, but how would you, if I'm that person, I'm sitting across the table from you and I say, why couldn't you just bake the cake? Is it that hard to do it? How would you respond to that? What would you say, or what do you say to people who raise that objection?
I try to explain what I just did, that the cake it's not just eggs and sugar and butter. My cakes are hopefully a canvas that I get to help you, create something artistic to help you celebrate a birthday, an anniversary, a baby shower, whatever. This cake celebrates a wedding, a marriage, and that marriage is something that I can't participate in. Well, you're not participating in it. Yes, I am. I'm using all the talents that God's given me to create it in the first place, to use, whatever design to communicate with the couple or the person what the design is going to be and turn that into reality.
Here's a kind of speculative question, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are. What do you think was really being demanded of you there? Because I get the sense that there's a real subtext in cases like this. This is not really about a cake. It's not really about flowers. And my mind goes back to Carl Trueman's recent book. I had him on Upstream to talk about Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. And he says that recognition is very key to sexual identity politics, that being recognized as valid by the public in general is very crucial to, the sense of self that emerges out of these identities. What do you think was really being asked of you? And is it really fair to just say it's a cake?
Well, for the two men, I can't speak to their motive and what they wanted me to validate or not validate. They were, as far as I know, asking me to create a cake to help them celebrate. But when they took the complaint to the state then pretty much demanded, you will make their cake or you will go out of business and we'll see to it that you're punished. There was jail time involved with the original charge, up to a year in jail and $500 per charge. And there were two charges. So conceivably $1,000, which is, not that much, but for a small guy like me, that's substantial. 2 years in jail. It was quite the threat.
So that's the moment you knew this is a lot bigger than you ever anticipated.
Yeah.
What did the hate mail and the portrayals of you as a hateful, bigoted person do to you emotionally and spiritually in your family? How did you get through that?
I never assumed that even though they were addressed to me or they were calling me on the phone, I'm not the one who designed marriage. I didn't design sexuality or gender. So their argument wasn't with me. And I was willing to, take the words that they said, knowing that God is the one who created it. So it's not my problem.
That's amazing. I love that. What an expression of courage. I know that if I were in that situation, I would have I don't know what I'd do, but I know I'd have a strong temptation to just kind of, get along. That I would not be immediately prone to just making a stand that's going to make me a national lightning rod figure. That would be very, very tough to do. Was there prayer involved? Was there?
Well, like I said, right at the beginning, we had talked about what cakes we would create, what we wouldn't. There's a line in the sand. And if you want pink flowers and I don't have pink, there's another way to compromise to do that. But if you want a cake that denigrates somebody, says hateful things about the person next door to you, I'm not going to do that. And I've had people ask me to create cakes that denigrate gays. I'm not going to do that either. So it's drawing the line in the sand. I'm not going to use the talents God's given me to hurt people. I want to help them celebrate, but I can only use those things to celebrate.
Jack, I think that what's so powerful about your story and your case, and Barronelle's as well, is that these two choices of profession are about as far from the center of the cultural wars and conflict as you can imagine. This is the kind of thing that a person who wants to be left alone does, right? You don't work for ADF, right? You don't work for the Colson Sitter. You're not out there talking.
And you're both glad.
Right. Well, we're glad you worked for the business you did and did what you did. But, in light of that, I have this feeling that there are a lot of people out there who think that they can just sit this out. There's this expression that goes around that the culture wars are a waste of Christian credibility, that they're just not something we should be spending our time on, that we should just, love people and act like Jesus did and so forth. And all that's good. But in light of your experiences, what would you say to someone who thinks we can just kind of sit out the culture wars and mind our own business?
I don't think any of us can. If I were a house painter, this would be like, you can only paint these houses, or you have to paint these houses. It's not so much just the paint, but can you paint a whole house, or you only get to paint the living room? They've taken away that part of my livelihood because of my beliefs. So it could affect anybody in any line of work. And so we all need to be prepared to take the stand. And is the stand that we're going to take worth it?
Matt, I want to loop you in here because I want to talk about how this thing proceeded. If we do a full review of the legal proceedings, it'll be a little bit boring, but I think you could probably give us an exciting highlights reel of what went on, because this story has a happy ending. By no means conclusive, but we'll get to that in a second. But this is a happy ending. So what happened with Jack's case?
Yeah, so after this complaint was filed in the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, they ruled against him, and the case progressed through state court, and where each step along the way, Jack lost. I think one of the most egregious ones was where the commission was comparing Jack's beliefs about marriage, belief held by millions of people across the world for millennia, and saying, these are no different than those that justified the Holocaust or other terrible things, and saying his beliefs about marriage are no different. Well, when the case reached the U.S. Supreme Court, we were highlighting that, of look at this hostility towards Jack's faith, but also the speech argument, that what he does is speech. Speech comes in many forms. It can be the words we say, that what we write, a design on a t-shirt, or like Jack, the art he creates in every custom cake he designs. And so the Supreme Court, they looked at it and said, well, look, we can resolve this on this question of hostility. The government is never supposed to show hostility towards people of faith. The government's supposed to be neutral. You don't pick and choose some beliefs as better than others. And that's exactly what the Colorado Commission did. It looked at Jack and said, your beliefs are abhorrent. You ought to lose. And so they ruled for him on that ground. So it was a great victory, truly, on this idea of the limits of the government to punish and show hostility towards people of faith.
And yet, this is not the end of the story, is it? Well, what would you say to someone who looks at this and says, okay, religious freedom is protected now. We don't have to worry about the demands of the new definition of marriage and so forth, and the sexual identities around that encroaching on our freedoms. What happened? Yeah,
well, unfortunately, the same day that the Supreme Court agreed to hear Jack's case, and remember, they get thousands upon thousands of requests to hear a court case every year and only take a select few. That same day, Jack got a call from an activist attorney in Colorado asking him to design a cake celebrating a gender identity transition.
So like Matt said, it was the day that the court granted our case. So it was the odds of getting granted by the U.S. Supreme Court very slim. And that day, I've got TV cameras, reporters, newspapers, chaos. There were more people in my little shop than there are here in this room, and it was like pandemonium. We get a call in the middle of that for this cake that it's an attorney actually in Denver who requested us to create a cake that celebrated gender transition, changing from male to female. And the cake was described. We told this person, that's not a cake that we can create. We'll create other custom work for you. It's not your identity. That's not a factor. But we can't create this cake because it is a message. You've told us the different things that make it a message. It wasn't just a cake. And so that person filed a complaint with the state. And the same Civil Rights Commission that Matt was just talking about that compared my faith to the Holocaust and slavery. So that was in June of 2017. December 2017, we go to the U.S. Supreme Court. We have the arguments. Then we have to wait till they release their opinion. That was in June of 2018. The justices reprimanded the commission because of their egregious hostility to me and my faith and ruled 7-2 in my favor. 3 weeks later, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission ignored that rebuke and took up the complaint from this attorney and said, we'll go ahead and file charges against Jack. And so that case went forward.
Who are the members of the Civil Rights Commission accountable to? How does this sort of body come about, and how many states have this happening? Yeah,
so we've got, over 20 states now have laws. We call them SOGI laws. They're sexual orientation, gender identity laws that say you can't discriminate based on those characteristics. those are the laws that were weaponized against Jack, against Barronelle, and some of our other cases. And in a lot of these states, you have these human rights commissions. Some of them are composed by LGBT activists, and others that are, like we saw in Jack's case, have a strong bias against people of faith. And they're the ones given the power to enforce these laws, to bring the government's weight to bear against people like Jack and Barronelle and others. And so that was what was so concerning to see right after a great victory at the Supreme Court, that same commission turned around and said, no, we think we were right the first time when we ruled against you. Even though the highest court in the land just rebuked us, no, we're going to double down on it.
What does this leave someone in Jack's shoes open to today? I mean, how, to what extent could this whole process just recur again?
Yeah, well, it did. I mean, in Jack's case, so after that second case by the Human Rights Commission, eventually they dismissed it. And immediately after that, this attorney turned around and filed a personal on their own behalf against Jack. And now Jack's immersed in that third lawsuit. And so you see this instance where it's just going to be again and again after people of faith until they crumble. And that's why I'm so inspired by Jack and Barronelle and others like them that are saying, we're going to stand on truth on all this, and we're going to stand for our convictions and not waver on them.
Jack, I'd love to hear you talk about the meaning of religious freedom and freedom of speech and artistic expression and just the importance of those things to you, because I feel like we're in a time when those values have gone out of fashion, especially on the left. There was once a time when a left-leaning person would be the greatest vocal advocate of freedom of religion and expression and speech, and that's not the case anymore. So what do these things mean to you, and why do you think they're important?
They're important because every American should be free to live and work according to their conscience, not just florists, not cake bakers, people who are expressive work, but every American, everybody in this room is subject to these laws and the punishment that the government can inflict almost at a whim. These commissioners were appointed by the governor. They're not elected by the people, and they get to interpret our Constitution, and that's not the way our Constitution was created. So they're important because they affect everybody.
Is there anything else that's happened since the Civil Rights Commission taking it back up and then eventually dropping it like we discussed? What's the latest development here? Or are you finally enjoying some peace?
When the Civil Rights Commission dismissed their case, 3 months later, the attorney who filed that complaint sued me personally. So last year in March, we were in court, and because of COVID, we did it via Zoom. Then the judge in June ruled against me, said that I understand that you create a cake for everybody. You'll create, this other cakes for this attorney, the cake that this attorney asked for in the celebration you wouldn't create, but I'm going to find you guilty of discrimination because you declined it because of this person's gender identity. So we lost. We filed an appeal. We're waiting for the Colorado Court of Appeals to put us on their calendar. So ADF is still representing us there, so Matt can explain that.
Yeah, and one of the things that ought to worry all of us is in the midst of all of this attorney that's doing this, the question came up, well, what if this case gets dismissed? What if Jack wins? The response is, well, then I'm going to call you up the next day and ask you to do another cake. And you just, again, get this sense of it's not enough to just, file a case. It is they're going to keep coming after people of faith until we cave. And I think that's why it's so important for these people to know that we are going to stand firm on what's truth, because what else can we do but to stand on the gospel and to stand on the convictions that Jack and Barronelle and others like them have.
And they have strong convictions too. They're not giving up. We can't give up either. And we're giving up way more than they are. We're giving up our faith.
Absolutely. I mean, if you need to decompress, come back down here to Florida and just enjoy some stress relief, because
you've heard about my governor.
This sounds absolutely exhausting. At what point does the Supreme Court or some other high body say, enough, leave this guy alone? These are repeat cases. This is the same conceptual material.
Yeah. So that's what we're hoping for. One of the things that's been so inspiring with Jack and Barronelle is that other creative professionals have been inspired by their stand. And one of those is Lori Smith, who is another creative professional also in Colorado. And Lori does graphic design and websites, and she does them. One of the things she wants to go into is the wedding website industry of couples setting them up and all of that. But she knows, just like what you saw with Jack, that the state's going to come and say, you must do them for same-sex weddings. So we filed a lawsuit on behalf of Lori Smith. And in the ruling against her, the court said, we know what you do is speech. We acknowledge your graphic design, your creating these websites is speech protected by the First Amendment. Nonetheless, the state's interest in enforcing that SOGI law outweighs your right to free speech. You heard that right. Your First Amendment right gives way to this Colorado state law. So the Supreme Court took up this case. It's going to be argued this fall, but it goes to the point that the court didn't address in Jack's case, which is what about Jack's right to free speech when he creates the case? This case is going to head on address that issue, hopefully. And we're praying that the court uses that to set up this strong principle that when it comes to people creating art, expression, design, that their constitutional right is firm and secure, and the state can't punish them, can't force them, coerce them to speak messages, engage in expression that they disagree with.
We've got a live audience here, so I just want you guys to give Jack a round of applause for what he's been doing here.
Thank you so much.
I'm listening to all this and I'm realizing that this man has devoted years and years of his life to actively resolving these questions in the public sphere. And, he's got a great team working with him. But in the meantime, he's giving up years of his life, essentially, peace for him and his family to conduct his business. That's a rough thing to do. That's a sacrifice, but it's something that I think we all recognize here this weekend is crucial to how we interpret our laws and our Constitution in this country. So thank you. I want to bring up Barronelle Stutzman, who's our second guest today on Upstream. And we're going to talk about some of the same issues, but Barronelle is a longtime owner and operator of Flowers by Arlene is the name. And this is in...
No. Arlene's Flowers.
Arlene's Flowers. Got to get that perfectly right. And this is in Washington State,
Yeah.
Correct? And you have since passed on the business to someone else, is that right?
Last Friday, I retired.
All right. Now, if you can, please describe to me the political situation that's underlying your case in Washington State, because obviously Colorado is developing in a liberal direction. I think we all look at Washington State and we think, oh yeah, they're gone. What happened? And was there a civil rights commission involved? What was the deal there?
Well, one of my favorite customers, Rob, who I've waited on for almost 10 years, he was gay. I knew that from the beginning. It was never an issue. I waited on him for all kinds of events, and he came in one day to talk to me about getting married to his partner. And I just gently told him that I could not do that because my faith teaches me that marriage is between a man and a woman. And he said he understood, and we hugged each other, and he left without any complaints. The Attorney General filed a complaint against me personally and corporately, and the ACLU also filed the complaint against me personally and corporately. So then I got sued.
I'm not a lawyer, but what is the standing issue here? The Attorney General saw a Facebook post and then decided to sue a florist? How does that work?
So it's again, these state non-discrimination laws, and in the case of Washington, it gives the Attorney General the ability to enforce it. And so the Attorney General, going off this Facebook post, said, look, Barronelle, you violated our law. We're coming against you. And then the ACLU jumps on, representing the two men involved, and again, suing her corporately, so going after her business as the business owner, but then her personally, which is, you talk about a level of animosity there to say, not only are we going after your business, but your retirement, your savings, everything you own, we're going to go after to enforce our law against you.
When I was reading about your background, Barronelle, I saw, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that you were in this business for 40 years? Is that right?
I was 3 when I started.
You were. I wasn't counting on anyone here to do the math, but so you love this.
I do. Yeah.
What was your business like? Tell me about why you loved it so much. I asked Jack that question. I'd love to know your answer.
Well, I was never going to be a florist, and my mom had a flower shop, and she asked me if I would deliver after I got off work, and I said sure. Bad mistake. I am directionally handicapped, so I never went by north, west, south, and east. I said you just turn right where there's 3 shrubs and a barking dog. So I didn't deliver very often. So then I just started doing cleaning toilets and mopping floors, and pretty soon I had some designers train me. Then I went back to school, and I became a full-fledged florist, and I love it.
What was your typical customer like? I mean, what kind of events did you put together arrangements for?
Oh, there's so many. Of course, birthdays and anniversaries and weddings were a big part of it. But some of them I can't tell you about because they were sort of weird. But it's just, you get to be creative. You get to know these people, and when they come in and their personalities, and you get to create for them. And just like Jack, it's an art. It's an art to create something for somebody special.
When you saw that gay marriage was going to become the law of the land in states, and then eventually, of course, headed to the Supreme Court, which was after this, right? At this point, this is all before Obergefell in both of y'all's cases. When you saw that that was going to happen, did you ever sit down and have the same kind of discussion or thought process that Jack had and think, okay, this is a scenario that could unfold. What am I going to do in this situation?
No, never even occurred to me, because they promised us when they passed this that it would not affect anybody. You know, they just wanted to let live and live. And so it never even crossed my mind. And I think it was only like 2 weeks or 2 months after they passed that law that we got hit.
And yet you were able to, right then and there, describe your convictions and tell Rob, right, why you couldn't put together this particular arrangement for this particular occasion. I mean, that's amazing. That's really impressive to be able to stand on your feet like that and give an answer.
Oh, I didn't know what I was doing. I just went home and told my husband, Rob came in and asked me to do his wedding, what are we going to do here? And he said, God's very clear on his message about marriage. So it was my job to tell him the best way I could, why I couldn't do his marriage. And so when he came in, I told him I couldn't do his marriage because of my relationship with Jesus Christ. I just, he just took it very graciously. So I didn't think there was a problem there.
And this person, he was your friend?
Yes. And I still consider him a friend.
You still consider him a friend?
I would wait on him another 10 years.
Do you guys talk at all?
No, I wish we could. I did ask to talk to him after the lawsuit was settled, and his attorney's answer is what he didn't think it'd be right at this time. So I didn't get to see him.
Your situation was billed by the media in very much the same way that Jack's situation was billed as, this is a florist who won't do an arrangement for a gay couple. Why would you describe that as an inaccurate picture of the situation?
Well, it's sort of a silly statement, for I waited on him for 10 years, and I've had all kinds of employees, and I waited on all kinds of customers. We serve everyone. We just don't do every event.
Were there any other events that you were... besides the weird ones that you don't want to talk about, were there any other events that you just said, I can't do this?
No, that's the first one that came up that was really against my faith and my principles.
Yeah. When Jack mentioned the divorce cakes and stuff like that, I thought, there are divorce cakes? That's a thing people do? Ooh. Wow. Okay. I mean,
you're so protected.
I'm sorry. I'm just a little idealistic, I guess. I don't...
Sorry.
She doesn't look that feisty, but she is. You got to watch her. Sarah warned me about you, Barronelle. She said I got to watch out. What would you say? And this is another question I posed to Jack, but I'd be interested to hear your answer. What would you say to those people who just think, Barronelle, you should have just done the arrangement? Why is it such a big deal? Why is this a violation of your relationship with Jesus?
Well, marriage symbolizes Christ and his relationship with the church. And many times I'll go to the weddings and help the bride get dressed and sew a button on tux and greet the guest. And it's a very personal thing with the people that are getting married. And so to cross that line, as much as I love Rob, I could not do that for Christ. I could not cross that line for Christ.
Matt, I want to ask you about the how the whole process unfolded, because Barronelle's case came to a different resolution, and it was somewhat of a different process. So what happened along that process?
Yeah, so, Jack and Barronelle's cases were sort of happening at the same time. And after Barronelle's case worked its way through the Washington Supreme Court, the Washington Supreme Court ruled against her, and we, just like in Jack's case, we're asking the Supreme Court to review it, and the court took up Jack's case and did the ruling on behalf of Jack, like we talked about, and then turned to Barronelle's case and said, we're sending your case back to the Washington Supreme Court, reconsider it, relook at it in light of Jack's win. Now, normally when the Supreme Court does that, it's a clear sign of, lower court, you got it wrong, fix this. But in Barronelle's case, they didn't. The Washington Supreme Court doubled down, issued almost the exact same opinion against her as it had done before, and she lost again. And so then we once again took her case back to the U.S. Supreme Court, hoping that her case might be the one where they get into the concerns about free speech and religious exercise, and even the Washington Supreme Court's failure to really grapple with the ruling for Jack's case. And the court unfortunately declined to do so. But again, the encouragement has been they are taking up Lori's case, and we're seeing other victories happen, and it's really been an opportunity, I think, for Barronelle to say, I fought the good fight. Now I'm passing the torch to some of these other creative professionals that are standing up and picking up this torch and running with it and continuing to fight for these freedoms for all creative professionals.
Do you anticipate a really resounding resolution to this whole question in the near future? I mean, we've seen incredible things happen at the court lately, haven't we?
Yes, we have, and we do hope so. I mean, we've seen some lower courts, for example, the Arizona Supreme Court. We had a case on behalf of two calligraphers and designers there, and we got a fantastic ruling from the Arizona Supreme Court saying they can't be forced to do wedding invitations, calligraphy for same-sex weddings. We had another win out of a couple in Minnesota that does videography, and same thing for same-sex wedding and not wanting to do those. So we've seen these lower courts all issue these really phenomenal rulings. What we're hoping is that the Supreme Court uses Lori's case or another one to build on that and sort of give a clear national precedent that can protect creative professionals no matter where they live.
So I want to ask this question of both of you. Imagine there's someone who's running a very similar business to what you guys have done, and they find themselves in a situation tomorrow that is very like that. A gay couple walks in and says, we want you to do an arrangement or do artwork or create some sort of artistic expression for our wedding, or perhaps maybe there's these days, a transgender coming out party or something along those lines. And this person said, Jack, Barronelle, I want to go out to lunch with you and ask for advice because I don't know what the next 10 years of my life are going to look like. What advice would you give them?
I would say that they, like I did, we took our stand because we were practiced at it and God had given us the opportunity to know how to do that. But I would also say, I couldn't afford to take an attorney to lunch, and if you can't afford to fight the fight, you probably shouldn't get in it. But ADF has represented both of us and every one of their clients without ever charging us a dime. And they run on donations.
Everybody has a line they won't cross, and you have to decide what that is. And if God changes his word, then I can change mine. But till then, I'm steadfast. If you are willing to stand, he will take care of everything else.
If there's someone in here who has a friend who is giving all the skeptical objections that I've given, has the sense that they should just bake the cake, they should just arrange the flowers, what's the big deal? How would you advise that person to talk to skeptics of religious liberty and freedom of expression? How would you advise them to make the case?
Well, it's not just a religious claim. It's not just Arlene's Flowers or the cake shop. This relates to each and every one of us. Whether you're religious or not, when the government can come in and tell you what to say and what to do and what to create, we do not live in a free America. And Rob and Kurt have every right to live according to their convictions. And I'm only asking for the same. And we all need to be standing up and asking for the same.
Any thoughts, Jack?
I can't say it any better. It affects everybody here. The people that ADF defending us, they're not just defending us and our rights to freedom of religion, freedom of expression. they're also defending Rob's rights, David and Charlie's rights, because they have those rights because we live in this country. If this country can take away our rights, there's no reason they won't take away theirs. So we all are protected by this Constitution, and these rights are valuable to all of us. They're not eternal, but they are very valuable. And if they go away, they don't come back.
Absolutely. And that was exactly why I wanted to have this conversation today, because these cases are not just about your individual circumstances, although your individual circumstances are deeply important to you and now to everyone in this room. But these are test cases. These are opportunities for the courts in our land to adjudicate questions that have come out of this new and, I think, unnatural definition of marriage, as well as the other claims of the sexual revolution that are being codified into law. And it takes somebody to be willing to sacrifice years of their life to get up there and actually work through these claims and stand before the court and say, I am the one who is affected by this negatively. I am the one who is hurt by your gay marriage, something that we were told again and again would never happen, but here you are before us. I want to stop talking now and open the floor up to members of our audience who have questions for these two remarkable individuals, and also for Matt, because sometimes you just got to let the lawyer in on the conversation.
I'm reminded of the case of Coach Joseph right now, and he did nothing except to kneel silently and pray, and the freedom of speech and expression, and they came after him for that. So could you comment on that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so this is the coach that after the football games wanted to honor God and would walk to the 50-yard line and just silently thank God for keeping everyone safe, for the game and everything. And I think you bring up an important point when they're telling him, Coach, you can't do this. This ultimately, again, goes back to the power of the government to come in, and whether you're a cake artist or a floral designer or a teacher at school, to be able to say, this is what you can say and this is what you can't say. We're also seeing this play out in the context of pronouns. And we've got several teachers that we're representing where the schools, the government is saying, you must use a student's preferred pronoun. We don't care that you think that is inaccurate. We don't care that that conflicts with your religious beliefs. You must say this thing or else you will lose your job. And fortunately, we're getting victories. We've had some on behalf of Meriwether, a professor in Southern Ohio, and one just recently in Kansas as well. But ultimately, these are all connected. Does the government have the power to tell you what you can and cannot say, what you can and cannot believe?
My question is, even personally, I've been wrestling with, how do I love my enemies as Jesus commands me to do? And I'm just curious if the two of you would be willing to share some of the pathway that you've walked through in the people that you've come up against here that have opposed you so strongly. How has that journey been in your own faith walk?
When I think of example, they beat Christ. They pushed him out of town. They swore at him. They did all kinds of things. They crucified him. And yet he died because he loved us. What better example can we have than that?
And you said, love your enemies. These people are not our enemies. But in my shopping center, 2 doors up from us, we have an Alcoholics Anonymous club. Would it be loving for me to give them the keys to their car when they're drunk? Because they need to go home. No, it would be loving for me to do something else for them, take them home myself. We need to show them love and not honor what would be harmful to them.
Jack and Barronelle, thank you so much for your faithfulness through all of this. I can't imagine what you've been through. How has this experience affected your own relationships with God? And what advice would you give to someone who is in any sort of similar circumstance in regard to staying spiritually strong and maintaining faith in the midst of it?
In my case, 10 years ago, I don't see me proclaiming my faith as vocally as I am able to now. Not that it was any less, but Jesus tells a parable of 10 virgins who were preparing for the bridal feast. And they come and say, it's time to go. 5 of them had their oil, 5 of them did not. And we always, hear sermons on that. You need to be ready. They were. All 10 of them were asleep. I was asleep then, but God had given us the oil that we needed to prepare for this battle. So when the call came, we were able to stand up and go fight. But that's what he did through us. So we were prepared, but we didn't know what we were prepared for, but we were asleep. So one of the big things is that now I'm more confident, more able, bolder to share with somebody about my faith.
And I call myself at that time, a token Christian. You do everything you're supposed to do. You go to church and you have Bible study and whatever, and you have a great relationship with the church, but you have none with Christ. And there's a big difference. When this all happened, my husband and I were talking about it, and he said, whatever it takes, we're going to do it. Whatever, if it takes our finances, if it takes our life, whatever it takes, we're going to do it. So, in our pride, we had to be willing to say, whatever you want of us, God, we will do. And you have to surrender everything. There is a cost, but there's a greater cost if we don't do that.
I think we're going to do one more question here.
Matt, in addition to everything that's been said, is there anything you would like to add about the discussion of freedom of religion and freedom of speech?
I think we look at these and they're so precious and so much of the foundation of our nation. I mean, the ability to speak the truth, the ability to live out our faith. And we're seeing it coming under attack in so many different ways. I mean, the stories of Jack and Barronelle are really just the tip of the iceberg to many of the other battles that we're seeing. We're seeing it with doctors and nurses wanting to live authentically and consistent with their conscience and say, don't force us to, whether it's an abortion or a gender transition procedure that violates their faith. We're seeing it with churches and others being pressured with these non-discrimination laws to say, you must comply with these as well. And so I think it's important for people to realize it's easy to look at Jack and Barronelle and say, well, that's them. They chose to go into the wedding business. But like they emphasize, this is going to come into every aspect of their life. There's no area, there's no profession, no calling, no building, no church, no home where there's not going to be an effort to come against our freedom of religion and our freedom of speech. And so I encourage people, number one, stand not behind them, stand next to them, stand with them in these battles, because a victory for them, for their rights to free speech and religion, is ultimately a victory for each and every one of us. It is a protection for each and every one of us to authentically live our faith, to live in a way that honors God. And so I'm honored just to stand with them and just encourage all of you that when this battle comes, that you will draw inspiration from their courage and be willing to have the same fortitude of whether it's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, to say, God, I'm going to be faithful all the way through.
Folks, let's give these three one more round of applause. Well, my guests today have been Jack Phillips, owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop in Lakewood, Colorado, and Barronelle Stutzman, longtime owner of Arlene's Flowers in Richland, Washington. I got it right that time. These two have been at the center of the legal fallout over religious and artistic freedom and the aftermath of the redefinition of marriage across this country. And in recognition of their courage and willingness to stand for their convictions, they are joint recipients of this year's William Wilberforce Award. Jack, Barronelle, Matt, thank you so much for joining me today on Upstream.